What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Fancy Ice, and I will be your YouTuber today. So today we're going to be taking a special in-depth look at the M6A2E1 experimental and the M6A2E1. So these tanks were very interesting for their time. They were proposed during the invasion of the European line. America was expecting some crazy heavy fortifications at the Siegfried line. Sorry, don't want to mess that up. So they were really expecting some crazy armor, and they wanted to limit the amount of tanks they had. So I'm just gonna play some gameplay in the background for you. So this really happened due to them not wanting to, sacrifice a lot of tanks, especially the lighter ones at the time. And it ended up that they proposed two tanks built on pre-existing chassis. So that would be your M6A1, or also known as the M6 or T1E1. Those were three variants of the M6A1 chassis, and they were only really different in their armament. The M6 and the T1E1 both had 90mm variants, whereas the M6A1 had a 37mm tandem gun with their 76mm. So getting into the armament, and so the M6E1 E2, as it was called, it was actually M6A2 E2, and then it had a T5 150mm cannon. This was actually a test bed used as their AA guns as well. So they basically slapped an AA gun on a turret and said, wow, this will work. And while reloading this weapon, they actually needed to depress the gun in order to actually get it in. It fired several different rounds. It fired a T32E1 armor-piercing capped ballistic composite. Anyway, and then it also fired HVAP, a T29E3 high-velocity armor-piercing shell, as well as changes that needed to be made to this tank in order for it to even work. The M6A1 chassis was designated and only able to carry a 76mm gun, which means it only needed a 69-inch turret ring. But in order to mount the turret, which is essentially a T26 turret, which was heavily enlarged, they needed to increase the turret ring's width and length in order to fit an 80-inch turret ring to actually fit this whole turret on there. As well as increasing the size of the bustle and the T26 turret, they had to, in order to up-armor it to the 77 inches that they required, which was 190mm, they decided to remove the driver's vision port as well as the machine gunner's port in order to put that fitted plate on there. This was a cast hull, from what I'm aware of, and during 1944 to 1945, Aberdeen Testing Proving Ground was actually used for the testing of this tank. And it was really only expected to weigh 77 tons, and it only managed to end up weighing 69.8 after it was fully loaded with a lot of shells. Ultimately, its max speed was 29 kilometers per hour. And it was very underperforming for what everyone wanted it to, really be. And a fun fact, the two tanks that you see in World of Tanks are the two different variants. The two variants are extremely different. The turrets are very different from each other because there was constant changes made to them, as well as this tank, as a design as a whole, was only designed to be a test bed for the T-29 project. And they were built in parallel to each other. So they really only wanted to field test the gun itself, but ended up making these tanks. There were only two built, which was the M6A2E2-2 and the M6A2E1-1. It was really crazy about how they made these, the amount of man hours they put into it, and then General Eisenhower said, this is a waste of time and cancel the project. Though that wouldn't stop them from actually testing the tank and testing the platform for the weapon. Big thing about this tank was, since it weighed so much, it really was it was really, really bad. Since it was built on the M6A1 chassis, it still used the M6A1's engine, which was a Wright G200. It was a 9-cylinder, 960 horsepower engine at 2,300 RPM, which was really underpowering this 69-ton beast of a tank. The gun itself, they had expected for -10 to 20 plus degrees elevation, and it ended up for the ladder of the tank ended up having a -5 gun degree depression at one point, just due to how bad it was. The tank is the size of a small barn, so it was just really huge, and it was deemed unneeded and unwanted for the goals that the U.S. military had. And obviously, the OCM really did not want it. They just kept wanting to test the gun instead of the tank, and that was very true because the tank on the road can only go 18 miles per hour, which is 29 kilometers per hour. In testing for mobility, it could not climb a degree greater than 22 degrees was the maximum it could go, because it would not go any further. It would cease up to stop moving because it couldn't drive. It was so underpowered for how much it weighed, which if you look into that, that's a 40%. It could not climb more than 40% of its actual weight up a hill, which is just nuts. It's so bad. And from a World of Tanks standpoint, this tank is very power crept. I remember when it came into the game, it was really fun to use, but there's just a lot of downsides to it now, just like there was in real life. Whereas, there was issues with the gun. If you were traversing the gun and moving at the same time, the traversion would actually fail, and your gun would get stuck because you couldn't elevate it. There was also, you maneuvered the gun itself by hand. There was proposals for an electric turret drive, as well as a hand crank. Imagine being the guy that had to hand crank this thing. It was a 5-crew tank. At first, the first gun used 2-piece ammunition, which required 2 loaders, one to put the round in and one to put the charge in, and it was just utterly horrible. Until they re-outfitted the gun again to fire 1-piece ammunition. But that kind of just wraps it up for, this little history lesson of America not making very good tanks, or good choices. They're really fun to look at. They're really fun to play, but they're just not that good anymore. And the M6A2E1 was different from the E2 because it carried the similar hull to the M6, whereas the E2 had that 27 plus inches extra armor for it. Well, not 27 inches, but it had that angled slope. They were great, but they're not good. So I'll catch you around. Thank you for staying for the video, though. Thank you. Bye.